Today is Sunday the 26th of January 2025 and this is episode number 63 of the Voices of Boyle. And for this episode, my guest is Brian Battles. Brian talks about growing up in Garrow in the Curlew Mountains, life on the farm, the community spirit and some fond memories of his time in school. We then chat about his time working in Brogan's pharmacy, which is now called Chemco, and also the transition into his own consultancy business, PharmacySuccess.ie. We finish up with Brian touching on his own plans to launch his own industry-related podcast in the near future. So I hope you enjoy this episode and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Brian, you're very welcome to the Voices of Boyle. How are you keeping today?
Good, Carlo. Thank you. Thanks very much for having me.
You're very welcome. So, Brian, you grew up in Garrow on the Curlew Mountains. So I presume you have a lot of memories from growing up back in those days. So could you share one or two with us, please?
Yeah, that's right, Carlo. I grew up in Garrow, so overlooking Lough. So I suppose Garrow looks a lot different today than it did back then. There's a lot more houses around there. And I suppose a lot of the people that would have been there when I was growing up there are no longer there. Grew up in Garrow. So I suppose memories of Garrow would really be kind of, going to school, walking in and out to the bus. Farming would have played a big part of growing up in Garrow, I suppose. So would have been out farming, cows calving, walking cattle here and there, walking cattle to cage from a very young age. Lots of relations around in Garrow as well. And some really, really good neighbours up there too.
Yeah, I do remember when we were young, obviously back in the 90s and late 80s, bonfires were a huge thing back in those days. And I always remember there used to be a big one up around your direction. And I always remember battles were involved in it. So it was...
the bonfire was a big deal every summer. Yeah, you'd be out collecting tyres and collecting timber and collecting whatever we could for the bonfire. So it was always a massive, massive occasion. And it was generally, we'd have the bonfire and generally the next day would have been the last day in school or definitely that week anyways. We would have had the bonfire originally at the top of what would have been Higgins's Hill. And it was there for years, and then it moved out to where the old Deer Park School used to be. So that was a great, it was always a great night. God, I don't know how many people would have been there, but I'd say in excess of 100 people. And a lot of people would have come out from town for drive-bys and having a look and having a nose. Yeah. So that was always a good, it was great. And even the lead up to it was probably more crack than the night itself.
Collecting all the tyres and then we would have done a lot of kind of collecting, and the Aoife and Orla Higgins would have gone around collecting money with us, and we would have had, I think every house used to give a couple of bob and we'd buy sweets and drinks or whatever, hot dogs and all that used to be.
Don't know if we were that fancy with hot dogs.
Right. Maybe it was a towny thing.
That might have been a towny thing. But it was definitely it was a really good night and a good crack.
Yeah, back then I remember there used to be big ones in Churchview, Forest View, Carrick Road. Yeah, there was a big one then out here, Mockmoyne, around where Dwyer's is. Yeah, and obviously there was loads back then, but thing of the past now. You'd be put in jail if you were caught burning
they're almost a thing of the past, I think. You'll see the odd fire now, I think, on the 21st of June, isn't it? Is it 21st or 23rd? Yeah,
the 21st is the longest day, isn't it? So does it coincide with that?
I'm not sure actually, Carlo.
Yeah.
But look, it was they were definitely a massive kind of date in the calendar.
It was
every year.
Definitely. And Brian, do you have any family traditions that were passed down or you continue through the generations that you can remember?
Not really, Carlo. No traditions, I suppose, as such on either side. Yeah. Nothing that stands out, at least. No.
And you mentioned something there earlier about your granny with a Honda or something like that.
Oh, yeah. So memories of growing up in Garrow. So my granny O'Connell would have lived in Gertchine. Granny was originally from Cage. But I have memories of her arriving, and it's kind of hard to know how many times this happened, but it feels like it's possibly more times in my head than in reality. But Granny would have arrived whenever she would have come to visit us. It would have been on her Honda 50. But I have memories of her arriving a couple of times while we'd still be in bed before we get up for school, as a bit of a treat or a surprise for us. So that was always it was always great when you heard the Honda coming.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you moved then from Garrow to
So
4
we
Mile
lived in
House.
Garrow, till I was about 15. And then mum and dad had bought a farm up in 4 Mile House. So between Tulsk and Roscommon Town a couple of years previously. So then they had bought a site up there near the land and gotten planning. So they were in the process of building a house as we sold the house in Garrow. So we moved. I was probably maybe 14 when we moved from Garrow, and then we lived on the plains in a rented house near the Walshes. So lots of really good memories of the time on the plains as well. And then we moved to 4 Mile House when I was about 15 or 16. So it was so I kept going to school in Boyle when we moved to 4 Mile House. So mum would have driven myself and David up and down on most days. And any day that Miss Keir was in at 9 o'clock, Miss Keir was coming from just outside Roscommon Town. So Miss Keir would have given myself and David a lift. David had 1 year to go and I had 2 years to go when we moved up. So it went up and down every day rather than changing, which was great that mum and dad, made that happen rather than having to change school at that stage. So that was good.
Made the transition easier.
It was, I suppose, I probably wouldn't have enjoyed switching school anyways. And it was probably more about the people rather than any kind of strong grow for academic or being worried about it upsetting results or anything like that in any way. It was definitely more around kind of the friends and the continuity there rather than anything else.
Yeah. And before we get into maybe your time in St. Mary's / Abbey Community, I don't know, was it Abbey Community when you were there?
It changed over while I was in transition year, I think. So transition year, we went back to school on for transition year, whatever year that was. They just amalgamated and then we went back in September and was straight into transition year. So our first year of being with the boys and the girls all mixed was for transition year.
Okay. Yeah. Right. So just before we get into all that, is there a standout childhood memory that you can remember as a young fella, before you kind of hit adolescence that stands out?
I probably, they'd all relate, I suppose, to probably been outdoors and farming. So I remember when I was growing up, if there was a cow calving or we thought there was a cow calving that night, I used to go to bed with my farming clothes on and then I'd put on my pajamas over the farming clothes. So if there was any stir during the night or I was called, I was ready to go. And even if there was no need for us to be called, mum and dad, one of them would have always called. Definitely me, more so than the other lads. I just had a particular keen interest in it. And would have been disappointed at the time if you missed out on the cow calving or something like that.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. And then I suppose some other ones. Yeah, we had a little pond in the field at the back of the house, and there'd always be frogs in that. So I can't remember what time of the year they spawn or whatever that's called, but you'd have the tadpoles, and I remember gathering tadpoles, and you'd be kind of watching them as they'd start to develop and grow the legs and start to grow into a little frog as they develop. Lots of good memories. I suppose of childhood memories in Garrow, and I suppose lots of our neighbours up there, like Elizabeth Kevill and the Higginses, the Kennedys, and the Supples. I better not name too many more. I don't want to offend anybody by leaving somebody out. But lots of good memories of just been in and out of each other's houses, and our house was always probably a bit of an open house. There was always someone coming or going, and it didn't really matter whether we were having tea or having dinner. It was just, whoever came in would just kind of sit at the table, and so it was very, very chilled, very easy, very welcoming, and all range, really happy. Yeah.
That's good, yeah. And so you mentioned there about the amalgamation between the boys and girls.
Yeah.
So what was that transition? You were there 1 or 2 years when that happened?
So I would have done TY fifth year and then leaving cert year during the amalgamation. It was grand. It probably added to the element of crack, I suppose. And I was never really academic. Really didn't enjoy school. And I remember after the junior cert, really I didn't have a keen interest in going back. And then after transition year, probably had less of an interest because without offending anyone that might have been organised in transition year. For me, anyways, it was a bit of a DOS year.
I think that's what the general consensus was back in those days. It was a bit of a like, well, what am I doing? You're not really doing anything. Is it? As you said, a DOS year.
Yeah. And because even if there was anything happening that was slightly to do with school or academic, I would have leaned more towards the DOS side anyways, because I wasn't really into school that much. So yeah, when the schools amalgamated, it was probably a bit of crack. Our year was probably particularly boisterous, I'd say. I'd imagine lots of the teachers that taught for a very long time would have agreed. I'd imagine there was a general consensus that our year was particularly challenging. There was lots of disruption during the day on many occasions. And then, of course, we made the paper when our Debs happened a few years later. There was some altercations at our Debs, and that would have made some of the national papers at the time. So our Debs was cut short. So we were. It was definitely a very a fun class with lots of personalities, and even thinking about it now, when you look back, you just have to laugh.
Yeah, I think you probably were one of the last years that kind of got away with what in my era was like the real messing that was going on.
Yeah.
But that was phased out, and I think the amalgamation would have definitely kind of brought a curtain to that.
Probably, yeah. But I remember David, my older brother, would have been in the year ahead of me, and even his year would have been a bit more settled and not as wild, I suppose, as our year. However that happened, it was just obviously a combination of different personalities along the way.
And just to get an idea, who were some of your classmates back in, just to get an idea?
So I suppose Jason Egan would have been one of my really good friends and still is. So Jason and I would have been in primary school together, and then started in what was St Mary's together, and then did TY together, I suppose. And then Jason's mum and my mum's from Gertrude and Jason's mum is from Ballymote. So I suppose they would have known each other when they were younger as well. So Jason and I were really good friends. And then Jonathan Shannon, Niall Egan, Padraig McGettrick would have been in my year. Barry Crine would have been in my year. Like Barry Simon. And then some of those, I think they would have all done TY with me. And then a few of the other lads that would have been in my year didn't do TY. But yeah, some of them, I'd still see some of them around and meet up with some of them from time to time. And
then teachers as well, because you were about, I think, 7 years after. I did my leaving in 96, so I presume you were 7-8 years after that.
So I was 20 year, because I was thinking of this, so we're having, there's a 20-year class reunion next week.
So it's 2004 then?
Yes, 2004.
Okay,
yeah, so 20 years ago.
Who were your teachers that you had back then, to see if there was any overlap between?
So I suppose we would have had the same teachers that you would have had when you're in the boys' school. Francie Flanagan, Gus Gannon, Frank Tivenan, Park Callahan. Paddy Nangle would have been there, and then Johnny Miles.
Tommy Conlon?
Tommy Conlon was still there. I actually never had Tommy, but Tommy was still there, yeah. And Don Conlon, of course, was there for the first couple of years that I was there. And then Clement Burns, Miss McLaughlin for maths.
Yes, yeah.
So yeah, no, a good few. Miss Donaher, Mary Donaher.
No, I don't really. No, she wasn't one in my.
Yeah. And then like other ones, then I suppose after the schools amalgamated, I remember we would have had some kind of new teachers that joined. So I had Miss Early for English. Mary McGettrick would have been there.
Was that Mairead Early?
No, Mary Early. Oh, maybe. No,
curly hair back.
That's Miss McLaughlin, I think you're thinking of, is it?
No, Miss McLaughlin. No, I actually had Miss McLaughlin was there when we were, but I think was it Mairead Early? We had French and Irish. She taught.
Okay.
Maybe it's a different Early, but I just think if her name is Mary and that teacher we had was Mairead, There's definitely an overlap.
Maybe
I think it probably is.
But yeah, like some really, really nice teachers, really nice people.
Yeah.
And like when you look back now, I suppose as an adult, you just think, Jesus, how on earth, like there's no money would pay me to be a teacher.
Not that back then anyway. I was going to say it's a different landscape now.
Yeah, it's probably has different challenges now because everyone's little Johnny and Mary is a princess now, whereas back in the day that mightn't have existed.
Very true.
But yeah, and like there was even like I remember I had Julie Miss Newman for Irish. She was a lovely woman. She was in the girls' school, so then I had her after the schools amalgamated. So yeah, she was a lovely, friendly sort of a woman. I remember her. She'd always kind of sign off every class as you'd be leaving, Slán agus bonnet, Slán agus bonnet, Slán, and everyone leaving nearly got a personal goodbye. And then like other really nice teachers like Mary Carr and
yes.
Again, I'm sure I've probably left out someone. But yeah, and of course Mary Kevill then would have been in at the secretary
reception. Yeah. She's still there, isn't she?
I think she is. Yeah, and Mary would have been one of our neighbours growing up in Garrow, so I kind of would have known Mary from that. But she was always very, very nice as well. I think she's still there. And then Jean McPherson, of course.
Yes, recently.
Recently passed away. So Jean was a lovely woman. And I remember at one stage maybe it was after the schools, in the new school, I think it was once they amalgamated, I would have known Jean. I probably was in Brogan's around the time, and then I remember Jean asking me would I help out in the sweet shop at break times. So that was a bit of a kind of a stampede for the 10-15 minutes.
Oh yeah.
And that was great because I probably would leave class maybe about 5 minutes early. And like any excuse to leave class for me back in the day was very welcome. And then I can't remember, I used to get something for it. I can't remember, was it like €2 or free? I can't remember, free stuff as well. But that was always really nice. And Jean was a lovely, lovely woman.
And then I think John wasn't he? John McPherson was the caretaker of the tech, wasn't he?
John was the caretaker, and again, like really nice man. And then sure, like I would have gotten to know them then in Brogan's over the years, and then years later, then when I worked in Dublin, I would have bumped into Jean and John a couple of times, and even when you mentioned the tech there, of course, sure, Johnny Murray would have been for tech drawing. Even though like slap on the back of the head of the T-square had probably been phased out at that stage. If it needed, definitely Johnny Murray wasn't afraid to let one land, and definitely never did anyone any harm.
No, I was going to say, do you think students these days have got things easier compared to your day?
I'd say in some ways, yeah. The whole social media thing, I'd say, is probably more of a challenge. So there's probably other things maybe that maybe aren't as easy. But I think the teachers probably don't have it as easy now as they had back then, because I think people are more kind of entitled. Like if I had gone home and said, look, I got into trouble today, or, was detention or got into trouble, or God forbid if a teacher sent a note home, you'd be terrified. Whereas now I'd say it's probably done a complete 360 where the parent, most of them anyways, I'm sure would be offended. And I'd say it's probably easier and challenging in different ways for a student. But I think definitely I'd see for the teachers, I'd imagine their job has gotten harder since you and I were back there.
I think so too. And any funny stories that you can repeat, of course, from those days?
Yeah, like I was smiling to myself there when I was thinking about the how much fun and how much crack was in our year. So funny stories. I remember when I was in sixth class in St. Joseph's out in Abbeytown. I remember at the time they used to come around and do eye tests on kids. So I remember having an eye test there one time, and they gave me a letter. They were like, yeah, you need glasses, and they gave me a letter. And I'll always remember bringing the letter home and destroying the letter, because I wasn't really enjoying school. And I was like, do you know what? I don't want to give people any extra ammunition to take the piss out of me as a young fella by wearing glasses. I was like, I'm not doing that. So then I rocked up then into secondary school, and I remember Frank Tivenin would have been doing slideshows of lots of Spanish towns and cities and villages. And I probably should have paid more attention back then to that, because I remember one place in particular, Valencia. Frank would have done lots of slideshows, but I'm sure I was probably too busy being a nightmare student to pay any attention to that. But I remember a couple of times Frank bringing me up the front and telling me that I needed glasses, and that you're squinting and you can't see the board, kind of thing. And when it was in a very nice way, he was obviously trying to be helpful, because I did need glasses. I was stone blind, like. But I remember getting glasses then. I think I got my glasses, like, I can't remember where I was yesterday, what I was doing, but I think I got glasses on the 9th of September 1999. And then rocking into school the next day. And I remember going into Gus Gannon's class. Can't remember what I had him for at the time. And I remember Gus kind of shouting at me to take off the glasses and stop mocking people who wear glasses,
Why?
And I remember going, because he didn't realize, because it was I didn't have them the day before, I suppose.
Right.
So I remember kind of saying, no, like, sir, they're mine, and it took a minute or two to convince him, and then I just remember him being all apologies. And like, I had Gus for most years, I'd say. And yeah, he was a really nice man. And again, would have like gotten to know him then coming in and out to Brogan's when I worked there over the years later on. And just a really, really sound, really nice man. So yeah. And I remember actually the day I got the glasses, sitting into the car outside Brogan's Opticians, and I remember putting them on in the car and saying to my mum, God, like, I can read the number plate in front. Like, do you want the glasses? And like, can you see the number plate? And she's like, no. So they didn't realize that I couldn't see the number plate. So I was particularly bad. So probably left it a little bit too long to get the glasses. But anyways,
so Frank was ahead of his time back then.
Frank was ahead of his time. Yeah. And it's funny, like, whenever I was years later, then I was in Valencia for a couple of work trips, and I remember with a colleague of mine kind of saying, like, there's definitely things here I should be interested in to go and look at and see. Lots of cathedrals and stuff that I would have seen lots of slides of over the years, but in the absence of remembering any of that, we had a much better time enjoying the sunshine and drinking and just having our own experiences.
Yeah. And so then, Brian, what would you think would be some of the best things about growing up and going to school in Boyle during your time? Is there anything that stands out?
I suppose when I look back now, the people I was in school were just all really, really sound. And even the school reunion that's happening now in next week, I've mentioned that to a few people and a few friends about a school reunion, and they kind of say, God, how are you still in contact with people from school, but they're just a really nice, sound bunch of people. And as I bump into some of them over the years, whether it's kind of passing through Boyle and stopping off, in Cooney's or Super Value or somewhere, no matter where you meet them, even I've bumped into some of them over the years in Dublin or different places, and just a really nice bunch of people. And like, we all probably would have ripped the piss out of each other and had the crack with each other. But I think when push came to shove, there were really sound people who probably always had each other's backs as well. Yeah. So yeah, that's probably the standout kind of take home memory.
And so, Brian, you mentioned there that you were never really into school academically.
Yeah.
But then obviously did you go to college afterwards?
So not immediately. So I started working for Betty Myler actually, when I was, I don't know, maybe 14 or 15. The summer that we left Garrow, I started working for Betty Myler. So that was handy because it was only down the road in the Cops. So it was,
that's right, yeah.
Whatever, 10 minutes on the bike kind of thing. And then we moved to the Plains for the year. So I used to cycle out to the Cops, to the spa, to Betty Myler. And she had fab gardens at the time. So myself and David would have worked with her for a little while. And then David got a job in Better Boys. So he was inside and dry, and I was still cycling out to Betty Myler's. So I definitely learned a lot about, there was obviously no clocking machine there, but Betty was very sharp. So Yeah. So I remember you might come rock along on the bike some morning at 9:10, having cycled from the plains, and Betty would say, "Don't worry about being late. You can take it off your lunch break."
Yeah,
Um,
shrewd.
yeah, but it was great. It was a really good learning. Like it was, you turn up on time, you take your lunch break at the time she tells you, and then you go home at the time that you're supposed to go home at. So yeah, she was a really nice woman, and I definitely learned a lot from her, and even learned a lot about the gardening and stuff. Betty was an awful driver as well, so I remember whenever we'd go anywhere, with the car and trailer, she'd be going off buying stones and plants and stuff with this little trailer that she had. So Betty would drive there, obviously, because I was only, whatever, 14 or 15. And then we'd get there and Betty would hop out and then I'd reverse the trailer because going forward was really the only option in the car for Betty. So I started there, and then I ended up, I remember, I started work for Pat Brogan, initially for his mum, actually, out the back of the pharmacy doing Mrs. Brogan's garden. And then had no real, like, while I was having those part-time jobs, had no real interest in school. It was just to really kind of file down the time and get out as quick as possible, because it just wasn't an environment that kind of structure in terms of academically that I was ever going to excel at, and didn't have the interest in it either. So started working in Brogan's, initially doing Mrs. Brogan's garden, and then doing Pat's garden out near the girls' school. And then Pat was opening up his second pharmacy up at Natural Options at the time. So I remember all the stock was in a shed out of the back of the shop there on what's now Shop Street. And I started kind of pricing that and organising that. And then Pat opened the second shop in Natural Options up in SuperValue. And I would have my first day there when it opened was kind of a wannabe security guard bouncer, because it was obviously really, really busy. Charlie from Fair City was there. And then from there, Pat, fair play to him, just kind of took me under his wing, and he'd kind of hand me a pile of prescriptions, and I'd look for Carlo Quattaro's prescription back when they were all pieces of paper, And then obviously there was a large veterinary department there and the photo lab. So I would have spent most of my time between the garden, helping out in the photo lab, which was always good crack, and then working on the veterinary counter. And it was kind of handy, I suppose, coming from the pharma background. You kind of knew what people were looking for, and probably would have known a lot of the farmers as well. So sorry, that was a bit of a tangent, but yeah, so the school piece wasn't really something that appealed to me. So after school then, I worked in Brogan's full time for a year. And then I remember there was a girl working there. She used to do the odd Saturday for Pat, and she was working in the hospital in Galway as a technician. So I kind of had been talking to her, and I thought, sure, this sounds like a nice handy job, and maybe I'll do a pharmacy technician course. So at the time they were just starting it in Athlone, so I inquired about doing that, and did that on a part-time basis in Athlone, while still working with Pat. So really enjoyed that because I was really interested in it. And it appealed to me, rather than being in school where everything, like half the stuff in school, didn't appeal to me. So because I was interested, I suppose, in the pharmacy technician course, it was easier. And any work that I had to do, or any study that I had to do, for the most part, did it very happily and very willingly, because I was really enjoying it, I suppose. And then I remember when I was doing that, actually one year failing a chemistry exam. And I hated the chemistry part. And Pat's sister, Mita, at the time, used to come quite often, maybe every second weekend or so. At the time, she would come to visit Mrs. Brogan, who lived at the back of the pharmacy, or the side of the pharmacy. So I remember a couple of Saturday evenings, Mita, when the shop would close, would bring me into Mrs. Brogan's kitchen and kind of give me some extra grinds on the chemistry piece, which paid off. And definitely learned a lot from Pat, from Mrs. Brogan, and from Mita on the chemistry side of things. Yeah.
So then you worked for Pat for a number of years. You went to do the course then in Athlone, was it?
Yeah. So did the course part-time. So at the time, I think the course was every Saturday and maybe every Friday, from 9 to 6, I think, at the time. And then was it one Saturday and 4 or something? they've changed that now, I think, so it's pretty much full-time. But I was lucky enough at the time that it was part-time, and Pat was great and supported that and facilitated the days off and all that stuff. So like, it definitely where I am today, Brogan's and Pat and my time in Brogan's has, I have a lot to thank them for, and still enjoy a great friendship now with Pat. So I was there, after that course finished, then I was there full time for a while. And, I remember then I was doing a sales and marketing course in Dublin one night a week, because I was meeting a lot of reps at the time coming into the pharmacy. And I kind of thought, Jesus, sure, I'd like to be a rep, so I'll do the sales and marketing course. So I did the sales and marketing course one night a week, driving up and down to Dublin, and really enjoyed that as well, because it was the whole kind of selling, I was really interested in it. So the course was kind of easy because I was enjoying it. And then I saw a job on the paper one Sunday for a pharmacy technician in St. Vincent's Private Hospital in Dublin. No idea where St. Vincent's Private Hospital was. Didn't really know Dublin at all, other than driving up to do the course and turning the car around and coming home again that night that I had been doing the year previous. So sent off my CV anyways for this job in Vincent's. And then I remember the evening, so I went up the night before the interview, and it was back in 2010 of the big snow. So I remember driving to Dublin, took hours and hours and hours, and then got to this place called Donnybrook, stayed there in a hotel for the night, and then had my interview the next morning. And then kind of came out of the interview going, God, that's what a proper interview is. It was really formal and it's all very structured. And thought, well, at least that's a good experience now. I'll do another one or two of them, and sure, then I'll maybe get offered a job at some stage, because nothing's going to come from that one. And then I remember a couple of weeks later then when I got a phone call offering me the job. So then I kind of had this bit of a dilemma then, where didn't want to move to Dublin, didn't want to live in Dublin, don't know why I applied for a job in Dublin, because getting the job wasn't part of the plan. Just getting the interview experience was the idea rather than getting the job. So I remember talking to Pat one evening after the pharmacy closed, and he knew I'd gone for the interview and was very supportive. And then I remember saying to him, I'd been offered the job, but I wasn't sure. And, sure, maybe, what do you think? And he was really encouraging, I remember, and said, look, go do it. Don't want to lose you kind of thing, but go do it. And if it doesn't work out, sure, you can always come back. So that was great. It was a great peace of mind, because at least I knew, look, if I go and I hate this Dublin place and this Vincent's place and this hospital job thing, sure, at least I can come back to Brogan's, where I have lots of friends in all the staff there. And so went anyways, and then agreed to do every Saturday for Pat for a month or two, because somebody was on maternity leave at the time. And then I probably did every Saturday for 2 years, and then probably at the odd Saturday for a couple of years after that. So it was a kind of a slow phasing out from Brogan's. Yeah.
And then, so from that, then obviously you have your own business now, PharmacySuccess.ie.
Yeah.
So what made you take the leap from working for someone to working for yourself? What was the impetus there, Brian, that made you make that leap?
Probably lots of different things, but I suppose ultimately just wanting to be my own boss. I suppose I bought a house in Strokestown there a few years ago, and a couple of years before that I bought a bit of land, have a couple of cows and calves, and I suppose since I worked in Vincent's for the couple of years, and then I remember I left there. First couple of years, I was really happy there. I was on the wards a lot, and then covering the dispensary a little bit. So kind of getting to chat to the patients, and you were talking to the nurses and talking to the doctors, and it was all really, really, really interesting for a technician. And then I ended up then working in the chemo unit at the time in Vincent's, because they were stuck for staff, and I got sent in there on a rotation. And the thing about the chemo unit is, if you're pregnant or thinking about becoming pregnant, you can't work in there. So at the time, there was lots of younger kind of female staff there. So I was put in there for 3 to 6 months, and then 18 months later was in there, and it felt like everybody was getting pregnant. So I kind of left that, because I just didn't, the whole being in a lab and being in a clean room and making up chemo, it just wasn't for me. I kind of wanted to be around, working, but chatting to people, rather than being in this kind of clean room where everything is sterile and sprayed with alcohol. And it just wasn't for me. So I left there and I went to work for an interesting company called TCP Home Care. So they did hospital care in the home. So people maybe that were in hospital but didn't need to be there. They were just having an IV antibiotic administered, but so they could be at home. So I worked with that company, kind of dispensing those home care IVs for a while. And I left that then to go work in I did a short stint, mat leave cover in St. Pat's Hospital, the psychiatric hospital. And from there, I went and I did a short cover in the hospice in Harold's Cross. So that was really, really interesting as well. And from there, then I went to work in the National Rehabilitation Hospital in Dunleary. And I probably learned a lot there. So the structure there, the chief pharmacist, or my boss at the time, who's still there, and still a really, really good friend. She is from the UK and was UK trained. So technicians were really pushed and promoted there. So I got to sit on lots of kind of committees and do lots of really interesting stuff that I wouldn't have gotten to do had she not just come from the UK. So definitely have a lot to thank her for as well, because I kind of got promoted and pushed along a lot there, and learned a lot, and got a lot of exposure to stuff. And from there, then I was kind of headhunted on LinkedIn by a company to work as a buyer for a kind of for a pharmacy group as a buyer. So I did that for a while. And then I ended up working in the HSE, in what's called the PCRS, the Primary Care Reimbursement Service. So if you work in pharmacy, a lot of people think that's the dream job. And again, like I just rocked up one day for the interview thinking, sure, look, a bit of experience here now won't do any harm. And then ended up getting the job and then worked there for a while. So that's the section of the HSE, I suppose, that pays pharmacies, dentists, GPs and opticians for everything that patients get on the medical card and stuff. So I was there for a while, and that was a really nice number. It was really cushy, great. Like the pay was decent at the time. The holidays were amazing. They had flexi time. I was playing tennis 2 or 3 evenings a week in Dublin. Was running a lot, doing a lot of adventure races, cycling a lot. But I kind of was looking around going, Jesus, like I don't think I can sit here till I'm, 65. So I saw this job in Wexford with a group called Macaulay's Pharmacy. So I inquired about it, and the closing date had passed, and they were like, look, if we don't find anyone, we'll be opening it up again and we'll come back to you. So I remember saying to the person on the phone, you don't understand, this is the perfect job for me. I really want this job. So she said, look, leave it with me and I'll see what I can do. And if I can do anything, I'll come back to you and see if I can get you an interview. So about a week later, I hadn't heard from her. So I rang again, and I'd say she was like, here's this pain in the arse ringing me again. So I said to her, look, I didn't hear back from you. And she said, oh yeah, that job is gone. Like the final interviews are tomorrow. So I kind of said, look, I want to be interviewed. So she was like, no, it doesn't work like that. You don't, because, we're at the final stage now. So you've basically missed out. So I remember saying to her, no, you don't understand. I'm getting the job. I really want this job. So anyways, I found out, I contacted the person who was interviewing for it myself on LinkedIn, and anyways, got an interview, and then had 2 interviews over the space of probably 3 days and got that job. So that was my first kind of commercial job in pharmacy. So I left the cushy HSE pension, great holidays, great hours job to go work in the corporate world, where I worked my ass off there for a couple of years, but learned a lot about kind of how the commercial side of pharmacy worked, managed a lot of people there, and just kind of really got a lot of experience. And from there, I probably got a bit of exposure to some other pharmacy groups. So I worked for a really nice lady called Adrienne Stack in Dublin. She owns 19 pharmacies. And she has a charity called Hugh's House that some people might be familiar with. And if you're not, look it up. It's a great charity. And for anyone who is in a position to support it in any way, they have a link on the website. They support families who have kids in the Children's Hospital in Dublin. And even during my time there, would have met and kind of come across some people from Roscommon where they were staying in the house that she bought that houses people. So slight segue there and slight plug, but definitely a fantastic charity, and definitely one that's worth supporting for anyone who can. So anyways, from there, I was kind of approached by a company called McCabe's Pharmacy. And they had, at the time, maybe 25, 26 pharmacies. So I went to work them as their commercial and operations manager. And Really enjoyed it. Still in contact with them. It was a busy job, a lot of responsibility. Worked, had kind of moved home to Roscommon, bought the house in Struxon while I was working there. So it was kind of up and down. And then that company was in the process of being sold to a German company. But even before that, I kind of had this little niggle that, what I'm doing here, wouldn't it be lovely if I could do it for smaller pharmacies and smaller groups and be my own boss? And much like with every job, there was parts of that job where you'd kind of be thinking, God, I don't like this part, but I'll just do it, and I'll get through it. And that's nothing to do with the company. That was just, being a human. There's parts of the job that you really enjoy and parts that you don't. And then I remember kind of talking to one or two people that had left there over the years that were working in other places that would reach out to me for help and advice. And then those kind of calls and messages started becoming more frequent. So I kind of thought, all these people that are reaching out to me for a bit of help and a bit of advice, there must be something in that. There must be some sort of a business there. So I spoke to a few kind of trusted kind of people in the industry that I knew would kind of steer me right. And most of them kind of said, yeah, look, I think there could be something there. And then I kind of had this niggle to set up my own business and work for myself, and had it for quite a while. And then I kind of always figured, well, now's not a good time. And if I get another 6 months under my belt here and another 6 months, and then another 6 months, and then ultimately I kind of just thought, you know what, just do it. So I handed in my notice and gave a really good long maybe 4 and a bit months notice. So I'd have enough time to kind of get my head around the idea of being self-employed. So then I launched the business then on the 1st of February officially this year, called Pharmacy Success. And haven't looked back since.
And Brian, was there any struggles with setting up that business, or hurdles you had to overcome? Apart from mental hurdles, maybe of leaving a stable job and going out on your own. I presume that's a big thing as well.
Yeah.
Being your own boss, great in paper, but it can be a struggle.
Yeah. I probably should have prepared for this and had 5 or 6 struggles ready to just roll off my tongue so that I don't sound like an arrogant dick. But the reality is, I suppose, having been in the corporate kind of world for so many years, working hard is kind of part of the course. And I remember one friend of mine who does a bit of consultancy kind of work saying to me, look, you've been around now for whatever it was, like 7 or 8 years in kind of, corporate pharmacy land, kind of dealing with people, dealing with problems, dealing with commercials, dealing with operationals, kind of the whole spectrum. Just set up your own company. You won't work as hard for yourself as you are for other people. And I remember kind of going like, I don't agree with that. I don't think that's right. But there was an element of truth in that for sure. But I'm probably still working as hard. The idea of like not working hard, I don't fully understand that. It's something that I'd probably struggle with. But to answer your question in a very long-winded way, it's been plain sailing enough. Yeah, so I set up on the 1st of February this year, and I had about 5 days in the diary. So I figured, like, sure, if I don't work full time for a while, it'll be grand. But come probably the 3rd week in February, my March was completely full. And then word of mouth started to spread a little bit. And then kind of did a bit of advertising on LinkedIn and a couple of pharmacy magazines. And now I'm in a really, really lucky position that, I've had a couple of people that I've worked with that have just kind of recommended me to friends, and then another friend and another friend and another friend. So it's been plain sailing for the most part. Look, there's challenges with everything. And yeah, like being self-employed, even when I worked in McCabe's, I suppose I would have been my own boss to a large degree. And I know even like kind of friends and stuff over the years would kind of say, oh, sure, if I was doing something at the weekend or I was working late on a Friday, it'd be like, oh, what are you doing? Like, just tell them you can't do it. And I was all kind of had there was no one to tell. So when you're at that position, there's no clocking out. Like, and definitely for me, when there's people depending on you, it just, the idea that you'd kind of clock out at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock or 7 o'clock, doesn't really, I suppose I'm just not computed or set up that way. So if the job needs to be done, then you stay and you finish the job. And like that work ethic, I probably comes from, working for Betty Myler for £2 an hour, and cycling to work, and then, working in Brogan's where, everything was done right.
Efficiency as well would be.
Yeah, like really efficient. Pat would have been super efficient, like really good businessman. And even Mrs. Brogan, I suppose, would have been in and around and out and about in the shop. And you kind of realize that, customer service and delivering really good patient care is really, really important. And, even now when I'm in businesses, it really kind of grates on me when I see really bad customer service. And even some of the pharmacies I've worked in over the years where you'd see people, maybe somebody who's really sick and they're waiting for an antibiotic or waiting for something, and people don't have a sense of urgency. I always would have had a sense of urgency around that, and that comes from Brogan's. And even now with people that I work with, I work with a lot of pharmacy owners now and business owners where, I'll often say, look, I can tell you what I think you want to hear, and I can go really nice on you. And at the end of the day, I'm going to send you an invoice. So it's no skin off my nose, or I can be really honest. And ultimately what I'm seeing here is really poor customer service, really bad patient care. And like that customer, that patient, that little old woman out there in the pharmacy, why has she been here for 30 minutes? Like, that's ridiculous. And it kind of, so staff just kind of seeing the importance of kind of prioritizing customer service and patient care is something that, even I suppose when I was in the corporate world, on days where I might have been there on other kind of errands or other exercises, is something that I just have never been able to not stick my nose into. It's just kind of in me, I suppose.
Yeah. So PharmacySuccess.ie, which is your business, that provides like a consultant service to GPs, pharmacies?
Yeah, so originally I was thinking that, look, I will just work with pharmacies, hopefully. I'll spend the first 6 months meeting people or asking people to please meet me for a coffee and, hoping to get work and knocking on doors, that type of thing. But thankfully it's taken off much quicker than that. So I suppose I work with a lot of pharmacy owners who are not always pharmacists. Sometimes they might have just be a businessman or a businesswoman who happened to buy a pharmacy, or they bought half a pharmacy with a pharmacist friend. And yeah, like I suppose most people who see or know a man or a woman who owns a pharmacy, they automatically think, well, sure, he's a multimillionaire or she's a multimillionaire because there's so much money in pharmacy. And the reality is, if you're anyone who buys a pharmacy today, even if you've bought a pharmacy in the last 10 or 15 years, or you've opened up a pharmacy in the last 10 or 15 years, you're definitely not a multimillionaire unless you have a couple
franchise.
Or no, unless you've got a couple of horses or a couple of properties or some other interest on the side. The pharmacy, the pressures on it, to be fair, are pretty intense, and even the cost that the pharmacist will be reimbursed from the HSE has dropped significantly over the years. So it's not the kind of, I did a bit of work recently with a husband and wife, and the husband is a pharmacist, and I remember the wife kind of saying to me, like, when I first met him, he told me it was basically like a license to print money. And I think she met him about 30 years ago, so it would have been certainly more lucrative back then. But there's a lot of challenges now that they face. So I suppose, so I work with a lot of people who own one pharmacy, two pharmacies, three pharmacies, and then I do a lot of work with some kind of smaller, medium and larger groups. It just really depends.
And you're kind of there to make them work more efficient.
Yeah, so I'll identify ways of kind of making the business more profitable. And I suppose, look, I'm really lucky that I have a couple of accountants now that will come to me and they'll refer clients to me, maybe where the business isn't as profitable, in last year as it was in the years previously. So I'll kind of help them to identify kind of where are they losing their margin or where could they improve their margin. Other pharmacies, then I'll kind of just work with in improving their kind of operational efficiencies. So it might be, for most pharmacies, their dispensaries are probably quite small places. And often the answer is, oh, let's get another person in here. And in reality, another person isn't the answer. It's just that we can identify, better ways of working, and we can identify double jobbing, and we can identify processes that we can streamline and make things that little bit more efficient. And then I suppose I do a lot of staff training. I do a lot of kind of training sessions with teams, sometimes after work. Sometimes I'll do training sessions with teams for what are known as symbol groups. So you might have your independent pharmacy down the road owned by the pharmacist, and then they might be in a kind of an umbrella group or a symbol group for kind of buying power and other benefits. So I'll sometimes do training sessions with them. And then I do a lot of coaching and mentoring with particularly kind of younger pharmacists. And then I'm a bit of a sounding board as well, I suppose, for people who own pharmacies. I do like a little bit of mediation and kind of helping with people problems and employee relation issues. So I think if you run any business, you're any small business, you're the marketing manager, you're the HR manager, you're the operations manager, you're the commercial manager, you're kind of wearing a lot of hats. And in a business like pharmacy where, you can't just go off to a coffee shop for 3 or 4 hours and let the business run by itself, you have to be there. And pharmacists are, generally speaking, they're an expensive staff member to hire. So most people who own a pharmacy aren't going to hire a pharmacist willy-nilly while they go off and work on the business. So they'll generally be, people who own pharmacies, they generally work incredibly hard. And most of them will end up doing a lot of work at home in the evenings that people don't see. So I suppose I kind of come in and I'll help them kind of step away from the business a little bit, so that it's not intruding on their personal life as much. And then I'll kind of work with people a little bit around if they're currently working 5 days or 6 days a week to try and cut that back to 4 days, over the next 3 to 6 months, and that they're consistently working maybe 4 days, and to avoid them kind of burning out and feeling like they have to sell the business. And then I do a little bit of work with GPs as well. And that was really an accident. So I did a bit of work with a pharmacist, and then that went well. And then I had a call from a GP saying, look, I need you to streamline my business. And I remember saying to him, look, I don't know if I can help you. So anyways, I did, met him, helped him, and really just identified why are the GPs doing certain jobs that the nurse could do, and why are the nurses doing certain jobs that the reception team could do, and why are we only seeing this many patients in a day, when if we just streamline things a little bit more, we could see more patients in the day. And look, that has a really positive impact, I suppose, on the GP, the business owner's bottom line, but it also has a positive impact for the patients in that location where it's much easier to get a GP appointment. And then there's a few other businesses here and there that have just kind of heard about me, mainly from kind of pharmacies that I've worked with, that I'll do a little bit of work and kind of help identify areas where they can streamline processes and make things a bit more efficient, ultimately to sustain the businesses long term kind of into the future.
Okay. And then, Brian, would you have done much public speaking, or do you do training seminars where you have to get up and maybe do some public speaking?
Yeah, no, I do a lot of that.
How do you find that? Because if you've never done it before, had you to do it prior to your own business? Had you to do any?
Yeah, okay. No, I did. Yeah, and again, like without sounding like a complete knob, the jobs I've had, I suppose, over the last 10 years, I've had to do it so much that I now do it without thinking. Like I did one this week. In Dublin on Tuesday, I did a training session with about, 25 to 30 people for about 6 hours, and I don't even think about it anymore. But I remember the first one I ever did was when I worked for Macaulay's, and it was in a hotel in Wexford. It was a training session, and I remember prepping, not sleeping the night before. Was really fretting about it, down to like, God, what color shirt will I wear? Because if I wear that shirt, then I'm going to be sweating like a pig here.
The armpits would show.
Yeah, the armpits were down to my waist, I'd say. So I did a lot of them, and probably was very uncomfortable and unfamiliar, and definitely outside the comfort zone for the first few. And then that's a long time ago. So I probably was really concerned about, what will people think if I make a mistake, or if I say something wrong, or if someone asks a question and I'm delivering this session and I don't know the answer, like then I'll have lost all my credibility, and people will think I'm a joke kind of thing. And then over the years, then you kind of I've done so many of them that I now are just a lot more comfortable with them. I do the odd one maybe where if I know that the audience might be particularly challenging. Or sometimes when you get to, I did one recently there in the last couple of weeks, and I remember there was a person that I'd never met them before, but I'd heard of them. And I remember I didn't know they were coming, and then I turned up and they rocked up, and I was kind of going, oh God, and now I'm a bit intimidated. And but that's all kind of positive nerves, I think. So
Yeah.
But no, and look, I think for anyone who does a lot, or it does kind of some public speaking, like even people that I worked with over the years, where you might have a presentation on a particular thing in a day, and they would be fretting about it the day before and the night before, and I'd be kind of going, look, just believe in yourself, like it'll be fine. And I think a lot of the coaching work that I do now and the mentoring work that I do, particularly with maybe business owners or maybe somebody who has recently kind of acquired a business and they need to now like lead a team and direct a team. It's all just, I suppose, about we all have the muscles there. We all have the ability to do it. And sometimes it's just about the approach and the self-belief, and really just flexing the muscles. And the more often you do it, the more that you get used to it.
Yeah.
But definitely when I was back in school, the idea that I might be in a job where I'd be self-employed, I would have been like, yeah, you're mental, that's never going to happen. And B, in a job where like I'd be, standing up doing public speaking in front of groups, again, I would have said, yeah, not I won't be doing that. And even in the next kind of 2 to 3 weeks, I've got some really big ones coming up with kind of quite sizable groups. But again, it'll just be a case of kind of rock it up. And look, I suppose I learned a lot of that. I've been really lucky with some of the people I've worked with over the years, that they have probably pushed me along, brought me along. And I'm always really, really conscious now if I'm working with somebody who isn't as experienced or is a bit uncomfortable, like I kind of make it my mission to kind of bring them along, push them along, and make sure that they know that, look, if you make a balls of it, don't worry. We've all made a balls at some point. And ultimately, it's better to put yourself out there, learn, grow, develop, and enjoy it, rather than always kind of put yourself down and be the underdog. So, yeah.
Yeah, good advice.
Yeah.
And that leads me on to then my next question, which would be, not question, but topic really. You're thinking of starting a podcast.
Yeah, I've been thinking about starting a podcast. So I've reached out to an industry expert. So thank you, Curlew, thank you so much for all the advice and tips and you've been giving me. It's definitely really helpful. I'll have to dedicate my first podcast to you.
What was the inspiration behind going down the podcast route? You've obviously seen that there's maybe a potential gap in the market.
Yeah, so my podcast might not be as kind of mainstream as Voices of Boyle, but what made me kind of think about it was, so I work with pharmacies at the moment, up and down the country, which is great, and it's a really privileged position to be in. That somebody will invite you into their business, go through their vulnerabilities, their concerns, things that aren't working well in their business. And what I notice about a lot of people is that they're really isolated. And even like I was with a really lovely pharmacist yesterday who owns one pharmacy, and they're having some issues, but they've beaten themselves up about it so much that they're the only person who is having these issues. So with that, I think there is a real kind of gap in the market for a podcast with that would be, I suppose, maybe to help people realize that they're not alone, that there's other people out there kind of experiencing the same issues in their business as they are, and what they've done to help overcome that. A little bit of it as well, is obviously to promote the business of Pharmacy Success and kind of make sure that has a long-term future. And possibly might grow. I've already had people reach out kind of looking to see, am I hiring or would I be interested in giving them a job? And while I'm not there yet, I'm really happy to not be there, because a lot of the businesses that I work with, not just in pharmacies, but a lot of the business across the spectrum, a lot of the time people are the biggest problem. So just managing people. The other thing I suppose about the podcast is that there's always new regulations coming out. There's always something changing, be it from the pharmacy regulator, the pharmacy union, the HSE, new drugs coming on board. So there's so many sources of information kind of coming at you. But if you're a pharmacist and, you have a husband or you have a wife and you've got a couple of kids, or you just have a busy life, or you're trying to run a business, it's really hard to find the time to read all this information. And currently the only way of accessing it really is reading the information. So my hope is to partner with a sponsor of the podcast, and then invite people from across the pharmacy spectrum to a podcast. And
kind of relay that information then, because what you said is a good point there. With the ever-changing landscape for rules and regulations, like you said, yeah, some people will be on it and they'll be getting. Other people would love to just maybe get in the car, whether they're driving to or from work, put on a podcast that's specific to their industry, and maybe you or your guest or both have kind of collated all that information and put it into a kind of like we listen to podcasts all the time about subjects we're interested in. We're getting the information given to us in an audio form.
Yeah, and I think that would suit a lot of people a lot better than maybe having to sit down and read however many pages of a document it might be. And definitely for me, like I listen to a lot of podcasts. I listen to Voices of Boyle when I'm driving along in the morning or late at night.
Nice plug.
Yeah. Download Voices of Boyle. But so I think it would be a really good way. And also, I've been sounding out like my target audience really over the last couple of weeks, kind of saying, have you read such and such a circular? Have you read such and such a document? And the answer is generally like, no, sure, geez, would you go out to that? By the time I get out of the pharmacy in the evening, it could be 7 or 7:30, even though we close at 6. And sure, by the time I get home and put the kids to bed or do X, Y, or Z, I don't have time. But if it was on a podcast, I'd listen to it while I'm out for a run or while I'm driving in the car. So I'm hoping to start that in the not too distant future.
And do you see then any challenges in the whole podcasting industry? Obviously, there's time involved.
Yeah,
people think 1 hour. Like if this is roughly an hour, that's 1 hour of time. When actual fact for this hour that or whatever happens to be, it'll end up being 5 hours of actual time. By the time you get around to editing, doing up the website, clipping, making sure the levels. So there's a time investment there as well.
Yeah, and I suppose I'm kind of hoping that I will have a sponsorship or maybe a number of sponsors, so that I could maybe dedicate a day a week to the podcast. Because I suppose I when I reached out to yourself and Florence, and thanks so much for that. It's the help and advice has been invaluable. I kind of had an idea that, look, sure, you probably had to go and try and convince people to do a podcast, and then you would have had to go and meet them and record the podcast, and then possibly edit the podcast. But I probably had maybe underestimated just how much is involved in it. So that, for me, I suppose it's really important that I'd have a sponsor
to kind of make, because as you said, you have to build it into your kind of work week, if you like, going forward.
Yeah.
But
it could be a great opportunity for some sponsors for advertising, whatever their businesses are. And even since I suppose I've launched Pharmacy Success back in February of this year, I have had quite a few businesses from within the industry kind of contact me to see what I'd be interested in partnering with them in some sort of sponsorship and stuff for different things. And up to now, I haven't, because I think for me, I just want to be able to say, look, do you know what? I'm completely independent. So any advice I'm giving you, if there's a particular product I think you should buy, a particular piece of software I think you need to invest in for your business, it's coming from the point of view of, you're the client, you're paying me to be here for the day. So the advice I'm giving you is completely 100% to benefit you and your business, rather than, look, here, buy this bit of software because I get a brown envelope at the end of the month. So, and that, I think that kind of credibility is really important. And I think it's also really important that, like even some of the people I work with currently, their relationship would be over if that credibility was compromised at all.
Of course, yeah.
And then I think the podcast as well, like sometimes I'll say to people, I might go through a particular circular or document with them, and I'll kind of go, here's the document, it's 4 pages. But in plain English, here's what it means in 3 sentences. And I think that's probably what people kind of want as well.
And at this stage, do you have any rough idea of the name of the podcast that you call it?
Yeah, so I'm hoping that by the time this podcast is aired, that I will have a podcast called Pharmacy Connected.
Pharmacy Connected.
Yeah, and the idea there is about kind of connecting up the different pharmacies. So between your community pharmacy on the street, your hospital pharmacy, your industry pharmacy, and then all the various kind of other government kind of bodies that are involved in pharmacy and the regulation piece, but also in kind of deciding, yesterday I was listening to the news, and there's a group that people mightn't be familiar with called the Medicines Management Program. And they basically decide, there's a new drug coming to the market. Is it worth investing in reimbursing it? And will we get value for money as a country for it? So I'm hoping that I'll have a podcast, Curlew, and that it'll be as successful as Voices of Boyle.
Well, come here. Before we finish up, I just want to ask you one question I was meant to ask you earlier on, because I'm trying to ask this to every guest we come on going forward, is because I think it's a very important topic. But do you have any COVID memory? Because COVID was a huge era, and long into the future, this COVID era, as I call it, will be remembered. What's your outstanding memory, or what kind of stands out for you for those maybe 2 or 3 years of lockdown and uncertainty, not even from a business point of view, but maybe just from a personal point of view?
Yeah, so COVID was very, very different to me, probably than most people. When it started, I was working in a job in Stack's Pharmacy. So whenever, I remember there was a COVID outbreak in the pharmacy in Cork one day, and I remember that evening kind of packing myself up, getting in the car and going to Cork for a few days. So that whole kind of being restricted, and I was kind of leaving the house nearly every day going to work, and they were long days. They were really challenging days, and you were kind of maybe working in a pharmacy much more than I would have done in the years previous and in the years since, kind of plugging gaps here and there. So it was, from that point of view, I didn't experience the same kind of 5K restriction. And then I was living in Kildare for COVID in Clane. And I remember I'd still be kind of tipping up and down to Roscommon. And I remember a few times being stopped, and it was great. I had the excuse that I was going to check the cattle. So yeah, I probably was, life continued as normal for the most part for me with COVID. So it wasn't that bad. Other things, COVID, I suppose, look, the downsides. So my granny passed away on the 1st of April, 2020. So that was right at the beginning of COVID. So that was really difficult. I remember getting the call. She had pretty much out of nowhere kind of taken a turn and ended up being rushed to Sligo, and she passed away on her own. So none of us were there with her. So that was that's hard. Yeah. So that was really, really shit, really difficult. And then we had the kind of maybe a day where it was kind of like, oh, will we be allowed to have a funeral? Was it COVID? Was it not COVID? Will we be allowed to bring her home? Don't think you'll be allowed to bring her home. Oh, wait, maybe you will be allowed to bring her home. Oh, no, wait, we don't think you will be allowed to bring her home. And then there was all the whole restrictions about how many people could be at the funeral and how many people could be in the church. So I think for Granny's funeral, it was at a time where maybe there was 10 people allowed in the church. So that was all really shit, and I suppose I was working with people and even friends with people where they had family members that passed away where, they didn't get to see them again. So we were really lucky that Granny got to come home to her own house in Gertrude for a night. And we all kind of got to see her and spend time with her. So that was nice. So it was awful, but it was also not as bad, I suppose, as some people had it. And look, for me, that was probably the big kind of downside about that time for COVID. Granny would have been someone who would have kind of looked after people. She looked after her own mom and looked after various people, family members over the years as they were dying, and would have been a really a phenomenal woman. I remember, I think it was in possibly second class in St. Joseph's School, and I can't remember what the exercise was, and possibly Maura Toneray was my teacher at the time, and it was kind of like, who's your hero? And sure, a lot of the lads at the time would have been footballers and people that some of them I might not have even, celebrities that I mightn't have even known. And I remember when it came to me, kind of going, well, like my hero is my granny. Which was quite funny, I suppose, for a young fella. That probably still stands today. She's still the hero, I suppose, for me.
That's nice.
And then, but yeah, I remember having the absolute piss ripped out of me at that time, though, when I was like, oh, my granny is my hero. It was like, oh, here's a dead arm for you for saying that. You know?
Dead arm, yeah.
So definitely that was a major downside for COVID. And then look, I got a puppy during COVID, because the rest of the country was getting a puppy during COVID. So look, it was pretty shit time for some people, but definitely, I had it pretty easy, and even, you know, I wasn't out of work at any stage. Definitely didn't have it as bad as some people.
Well, that's great. Well, it was great chatting with you, Brian. And
thanks, Garrow.
I wish you the best of luck in your business and in hopefully the podcast as well.
Yeah, thank you.
So thanks very much for coming on and chat with me.
Thanks, Garrow.